IVM.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Marbles Lost and Found. I'm Zain.
And I'm Avanti.
And we are a show where we talk about various issues with respect to mental illness and mental health and just get people to talk about it because it's okay to do so. So, yes, Avanti, we've, over the last few episodes, I think we've attempted to bust a few myths in and around the subjects of mental health and mental illness. And I think today we need to probably talk about something maybe as basic as therapy 101.
Yes, and in fact, I want to hear from you what your thoughts are. We've been pretty candid, both Zain and I, on the show about seeking help, seeking therapy. And I'm a therapist myself, so I'm always curious to know what my friends and people, what led them to therapy and actually what they were expecting. So actually, Zain, what were you expecting from therapy? How did you hear about it? How did you decide to seek it? And what was it really like for you?
Okay, well, as I've mentioned on the show before, I've been dealing with depression since I was about 15 or 16 years old. And that is actually something I only started to realize a couple of years ago. It just so happened that, I was talking to my girlfriend at the time, and she has been dealing with depression since she was a teenager. And a lot of the things that she mentioned that she was dealing with on a regular basis, I very strongly resonated with me. I'm going, holy shit, this is something I deal with on a day-to-day basis myself. Is that what this is? I had no idea. Because the longest time, the way my depression manifests itself in a physical sense is that I just have this constant clenching feeling in my chest all the time. But the things that I didn't know what it was. In fact, I still remember when I started to get it and I had it for like over a year, I was like, I guess this is just what people feel like all the time. This is life now, just roll with it. And so when I started to talk to my girlfriend at the time more and more, it just made me think, and then there came to a point where it just started to affect me more and more. Maybe I was more aware of it, or things just started to happen on account of work, or things were not happening on account of work, being a freelance musician and music producer. Things just started to weigh me down, and I just thought, you know what, let me just take a leap of faith. And a very close friend of mine at the time said, you know what, why don't you go see my counselor? She, in fact, stays very close to you, and I've been going to her for 6 months, and she really, really helped me deal with a lot of shit with respect to my boyfriend, with respect to my family and all that. And so when I heard her tell me about this, I thought, you know what, why not? And that's how I started.
But what were you expecting? Like, what were you expecting from your first session of therapy?
To be honest, I'm not too sure what I was looking to expect, but I can tell you how I was feeling post the first few sessions. Maybe I also sort of fell victim to the idea of the quick fix that a lot of people tend to sort of associate therapy with. Maybe like, okay, fine, I'm not feeling great in my head, I'll go to therapy and I'll be fine. It's kind of like people equating it to getting a shot and then you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I get this a lot, where people come in and they expect to leave the therapy session feeling good.
Yeah.
And actually therapy makes you feel a lot worse the first few times, because you're going into detail, into depth, into yourself. And
Yep, exactly.
you're excavating.
So I think for me, in hindsight, it was, at least the first few sessions for me were very cathartic, because I really was starting to dig deep and just starting to get out a whole bunch of stuff that I just wasn't really talking about at all. I remember for the first few sessions, my therapist didn't really say much. She just asked me a couple of simple questions and then just kind of let me do my thing, or just say my piece for an hour, effectively, which is how long therapy sessions typically are.
But she kind of led the way. Did she ask probing questions?
She did. I mean, nothing too probing, nothing that at the outset seemed too personal. In fact, to be honest with you, for the first few sessions, I actually just kind of felt, you know what, am I just doing most of the talking here? Like, where I'm giving, when do I get some give back as well, you know? But the thing is that I realized that as we started to go on, and I was seeing her regularly once a week, she painted a picture, because she was taking notes as I was speaking all the time. She may have asked one sort of simple question with relation to family, with relation to work, with relation to how I see myself in certain situations. And then as we went on, and she painted a picture, and I said something one particular day where, in this situation where I was talking to this person, I started to think this way. And my one basic thing for me is that I tend to use very self-deprecating language on myself. And I can be very judgmental of myself, unbeknownst to me at times. I've gotten better at it, but especially when I started, I was very self-critical. And as I started to continue, there were points where, okay, Zain, can I just stop you? You realize that what you're doing in this situation is very similar to when you told me about this, when you told me about this. Where is that criticism coming? That's very strong self-critical narrative coming from. And then that's when I actually started to dig deep and I'm going, oh, okay, so this is what we were trying to get at. That was interesting for me. So in the long term, I would say I feel the benefits more from therapy than I did, on a per session basis.
Yeah, that's usually how it works. And it's really interesting too because you actually use the word interesting. It was really interesting to me. And a lot of people, most people in fact, I would say 99% of clients will come to a therapist when they're in the middle of a crisis.
Yes.
When they really just want some help. And then, that's when they come. But that 1% of people come because they're actually super curious about themselves.
Right.
They want to know where these patterns have come from, how they can, like on a self-improvement basis, and not so much navel-gazing, but more like, how do I make sense of the world and kind of find my place in it in like a more productive way. The reason I bring that up is because therapy isn't just for when you're in the middle of a crisis.
Right.
And you must have realized too, you at that point, you were in the middle of a crisis.
I was, yes.
But you stayed on for therapy because you were suddenly hooked in a sense that you're like, wow, I'm actually really curious about myself.
Yeah.
Where did all this shit come from? How do I kind of change this shit?
Exactly. I do remember whenever I used to leave therapy sessions, I did say it was cathartic, right? Because as I left, and she's walking distance from where I stay, and it was about a 10-minute walk. So that 10-minute walk was just time for me to just reflect or digest what I just talked about or suggestions that she gave me at the time. And I'm just kind of going, that was interesting. There are things that I just didn't really realize about myself. I'd say my biggest takeaway for, the year and a half that I was consistently in therapy is that I just had very strong self-critical, judgmental language on myself that I've just only over the last few months started to let go of, and it's just been such a relief.
Yeah.
In fact, again, it's funny that you mentioned the thing about the 1% being, curious or introspective. That's where I kind of feel I am now. I'm in a much better headspace than I was when I first started seeking therapy. But there are patterns that I still notice. Now that I'm a lot more self-aware, there are patterns that I notice and I'm going, oh, that still comes up. And I kind of find myself wanting to book a therapy session with my therapist to go, hey, just letting you know, I'm doing great. I'm doing absolutely fine.
Yeah.
There's just this one thing. Everything else is great. I'm not worried. All the stuff I've been talking to you about, yeah, I'm good. But yeah, just this one thing.
Yeah.
How often do you get clients that do that?
That do what?
That actually, they come to you when they're not per se in a crisis, but they are reflecting and introspecting and trying to get a new perspective on things.
Literally 1% of the time.
Wow.
And when that one client comes, it's like, oh, wow, this is a totally different dimension.
Sure.
Even when I started therapy, I actually started because I was doing my master's in learning to be a therapist, so kind of in my mental health counseling degree. And I was like, I have got to be on the other side if I'm going to be a practicing therapist, because that's so fucking arrogant to, pretend that I can't deal with, that I don't have my own shit to uncover. And I actually didn't at that point. I didn't think that I had anything to really work on. And man, I went to therapy with some curiosity, and I stayed for 1.5 years in consistent weekly therapy because I was like, wow, this is insanely amazing.
That's great.
It's so helpful. It's really broadening my perspective of life, and it's helping, it's shedding light on stuff that I initially thought was okay, but it's actually not helping me. So yeah,
okay.
No.
It actually wasn't helping you. What do you mean?
Oh, my what I thought was okay in my life.
Right.
The way I have dealt with things. Oh yeah, that's okay. Being flippant about stuff.
Sure.
I was like, that doesn't help me actually. It makes me feel worse in the long term.
Yeah.
So,
So what would you say was your biggest takeaway from your therapy sessions when you were seeking it out?
That's a good question. So many takeaways. Right. So I think what's interesting about therapy is, and you must have heard this as well, that, a therapist just gives advice. I can just go to my friends for advice.
Right.
But Man, they do not. The best therapists do not give advice. They will guide the path. The whole basis of therapy is that you know how to figure your own shit out. I'm no expert in your life.
Right.
I can, show you some of the alternative ways of trying to look at your life, but that's about it. Well, not that's about it. And also, really, therapy is a healing relationship, right, between you and your therapist.
Yeah.
So it's this rapport that you build, and it's this safe space where you can kind of reinvent yourself without any judgment. And I think that was my biggest takeaway. This consistent once a week person who I go to, who I pay, and who helps me figure my own shit out in this very non-judgy, not easy, in fact, sometimes not easy at all, but non-judgy way where I was able to let go of labels that didn't serve me, for example.
Yes.
So that was my biggest that it's a relationship.
Yeah, I get that. And like I mentioned before, I'd say my biggest takeaway was really learning the basics of self-compassion and self-love. Just to some people that might sound cheesy, but at the end of the day, I don't know what it is that just makes it so easy for us to be so freaking hard on ourselves all the damn time. Like, we need to be doing more of this, we need to be doing more of that, we need to be more focused, and if we're not doing all those things, that's wrong, that you're at fault, blah, blah, blah. And then this just piles on and piles on and piles on for years. I do remember there were quite a few times where I just broke down and cried in therapy because I was just like, man, those feelings just suddenly become so raw when they're coming out, and you get exhausted, sometimes when you talk about those things. But what I wanted to know is, I feel that, yes, to rather re-emphasize the point that you brought up about giving advice and actually just listening and guiding. I think, unfortunately, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, but unfortunately that also seems to come from a place where people have been to therapists who may have just come across as a bit sanctimonious and stuff like that. But
yeah, I mean, I know of clients who have been, it's a bloody miracle that they've even come to see a therapist again.
Yeah.
Because the kind of judgment and advice they've gotten from previous, therapists and psychiatrists too, not to give psychiatrists or other therapists a bad rep, but some professionals, I think, so it's stuff like, oh, you should meditate and then this will go away. Or like, you should exercise. Why don't you exercise every day? Just shut the up. That's obviously I'm not exercising because I can't bring myself to do that.
Right, yes.
It's like, work with the resistance.
I think for what it's worth, I think the real sort of bottom line over here is just like how we go to an allopath for, treatment on certain things, and one doctor will have one diagnosis or one sort of prescription which is completely different compared to someone else. So, and we very often seek second opinions in the space of allopathy.
Yeah.
So, and I get, sometimes it's very difficult to do that when you're talking about mental health issues, because you are sort of wearing your heart on your sleeve, presumably, when you are sitting on a therapy session. But I think it's unfair to yourself to say that, I'm not going to do therapy because the first time was just not what I expected it to be. The person was judgy and all of that. And yeah, you know what, to anyone listening, yes, it does suck, and we're calling a spade here. There are therapists out there who are useless at what they're supposed to be doing. But please don't make that out to be that, if you just happen to seek a therapist and you happen to feel uncomfortable, you happen to feel judged, that is their freaking problem, not yours. That's not the therapist's job to make you feel that way.
Well, also I would go a step forward and say, if you do feel uncomfortable, and often clients do feel uncomfortable, and it's not always about the therapist's caliber of work, but it's also, a testament to the relationship or how strong of a rapport you can build by saying, I'm feeling really uncomfortable in this moment to your therapist. And whether your therapist can take it or not and work with that.
Yeah.
I mean, wow, imagine the possibilities after that.
Yes, exactly. I know this is something that we've actually talked about a lot before, and I know this is something you feel strongly about, is since we are talking about, therapy, I'm just kind of segueing into, the relationship between the biomedical model with respect to treatment of mental health and mental illness, along with the psychosocial model.
Yeah.
And how you feel that one can't function without the other in some way. Am I right in phrasing you that way, or correct me if I'm wrong?
So I think what I have a little bit of an issue with is when people say things like, oh, depression is all like an imbalance, a chemical imbalance in the brain, and so is anxiety. And the minute we, give you some medicines and correct that imbalance, you're going to be fine for the rest of your life.
Right.
It's absolutely not true, right?
Okay.
There are many, many perspectives, and the one that I happen to follow and see see around me is that, for example, depression and anxiety are often responses to shit that's gone down in your life or things that you're looking around in the world, and it's affecting your sense of hope and helplessness and worth as well. And those emotions, that perspective will, of course, impact the chemicals in your brain.
Right.
And yes, medicine will right those chemicals temporarily. But if you don't find a way to figure that shit out, right, to work on your sense of worth and helplessness and worthlessness and whatever, it's going to come back.
Right.
Yeah,
interesting. Because even so, this reminds me of a conversation that we had recently when we had Alicia, the therapist, in, where we were talking about, more very severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah.
Where, yes, I agree that my opinion is that medication can certainly help in, reducing symptoms and maintaining some sort of chemical balance so a person is functional and a person is not experiencing very intense or intrusive thoughts and feelings. But that's very symptomatic by way of treatment, isn't it? It's not really getting down to the root of the problem.
Yeah. Look at our own experiences, yours and mine, right? I remember when I had a really bad bout of depression, I went on antidepressants, and they really did bring me up to speed. But at the same time, I sought out therapy, and that's really what kept me going. That's what helped me figure shit out for the future. And by the way, after that episode, I had another episode, but I was just better able to cope because I was like, oh, this is what it is and this is why, and this is what I can do about it, or just how I can think about it.
Right.
Yeah,
well, looking at the clock, it looks like that's unfortunately all we have time for today for this episode. But yes, thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
Yes, and I hope this is just sort of, we're keeping this open-ended. At the end of the day, these are our thoughts and our perspectives. Nothing is, set in stone. These are just our thoughts on what therapy is like, and this is where Avanti and I are just sharing our experiences when we sought therapy as well. So thank you guys for listening, and thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions or stories that you'd like to share or concerns, please do write to us at writetomarbles@gmail.com. Keep in mind the 2 is TO, so writetomarbles@gmail.com. Thank you guys. I am Zain.
And I'm Avanti.
Thank you. Ciao.
Bye.
Hello, I'm Chuck.
I'm Shrikit.
And I'm Naren.
And together we are the hosts of the podcast Simplified. And we are going to be doing a 100th episode. Which is going to be a live episode at Doolali in Khar in Mumbai on the 25th of August 2018.
Yes, we should get the year right.
We're going to be doing a lot of fun things at the show. We are going to be talking about some stuff, simplifying them. We're going to have a very erudite guest who's going to hopefully make up for our silliness, but we sincerely doubt it.
And there's definitely going to be a lot of beer, so we really hope you join us.
It'll be fun, and it'll be more fun if you guys are there. So do land up.
See you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. It's IVM here, let's go. We the IVM kids on the block over here. Just to talk, taking a break from producing all day. Coming on this podcast cause we got stuff to say. IVM Daily is the name of the show. Monday to Friday, we ready to go. Talking about stuff in our head. We might even talk about our favorite bread. Signing out, it's IVM here, the podcast network that's in your ear.
Catch IVM Daily, Monday to Friday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.